So hello and welcome to the Bunnet Hypothesis. So I've been reading and watching a lot of content recently concerning different conceptions of freedom and democracy. I thought I'd have a bash at making a video about it because I think there's important democratic models that most people aren't even aware of. So I'll start off by laying out a kind of political spectrum, as it were, and then we'll pick out some of the more common models and point out why basically they're pretty shite. Now, it's important to mention that these forms of government aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, and that'll be very important when we later come to American democracy. So on the most authoritarian side of the spectrum, we've got the classics, monarchies and dictatorships, closely followed by theocracies. Next up, we've got oligarchies, which is a form of government in which a very small number of people wield all the political power. A good example of this is ancient Rome, where the ability to become a member of the Senate was limited to wealthy male landowners, resulting in their interests being pursued over the interests of the population at large. Now, an oligarchy in which specifically the wealthy individuals are the ones that hold all the political power is referred to as a plutocracy. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. You see, most people would put American-style democracy to the right of an oligarchy, implying it's more democratic. America! In actual fact, however, there's a significant amount of data that suggests otherwise. A 2014 report by the American Political Science Association examined this topic in some detail. The study gathered data on both the average citizen's political preferences as well as what would be termed the economic elite's political preferences. The latter's belief being something along the lines of "gives us all the money." The study then goes on to determine how often those political preferences are represented in policy. The study concludes that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So what does this mean? Well, if you're an American, even if you vote in every single election cycle, your political opinions will not be represented in government policy. It means, if we're to believe the data, that American democracy is an illusion. So why is this? Well, it's for a variety of reasons. Gerrymandering, the way that money is involved in lobbying and the funding of political parties, and the terrible way in which the Electoral College is designed. In order for a politician to get into power, he needs money to run an election campaign, and to get that money, he needs to take handouts from corporations. That politician is in turn going to be very unlikely to vote against the interests of those corporations that got him into power. Asking for politicians to vote against those interests is literally like asking turkeys to vote for Christmas. Generally, all you'll get is a "caw, fuck off." So how do you solve this problem? Well, you could attempt to enact legislation that reduces the amount of influence money has on politics. But again, "caw, fuck off." Or you could try and enact laws that would create a more equal society in the first place. "Caw." Now, you see, the only way that countries really pull off this kind of fundamental political change is through concerted, grassroots political pressure. Places like Iceland are a perfect modern example of that, and if I was an American, I'd be following their lead, getting out on the streets and organising. American democracy might not be perfect but it's still the best system we have. But there is an alternative, and it's called decentralised, consensus-based democracy. So as opposed to classic democracy, where generally majority rules, consensus-based democracy seeks to find the highest level of agreement possible before a given policy is implemented. So a group of people affected by a given issue get together, normally and ideally in units of no more than 200, where the issue at hand is laid out in some detail. There's then an open discussion where people are able to air ideas and concerns. Following this, someone will make a proposition concerning a solution to the problem. At this point, people are able to propose amendments to that proposition in order to build a greater consensus. Finally, you test for agreement and see how many people support the proposal as it stands. If the vast majority are happy, then that's ideal, you've got a consensus. If not, however, you go back, consider other propositions and other amendments, and continue this process until you build the maximum consensus possible. So at this point, I can hear a lot of you questioning, well, what happens when a decision has to be made on a larger scale? So people will vote for a delegate to go represent them as part of a larger democratic unit. This larger democratic unit then functions in very much the same way as the smaller democratic unit, with propositions being made and amendments being discussed. These propositions and amendments are then brought back to the smaller democratic unit for discussion and debate once again. In the modern day, this is normally done through something like Skype. And again, consensus is constructed. So there's a few key benefits to this model, the first being that it's the system in which people are best able to implement their political will. Secondly, the decisions will be made by people who are very well informed, as they'll have just experienced a rather lengthy debate on the topic at hand. Thirdly, there's very little room for corruption, as the only way people can influence a decision being made is to make an argument. So what about the downsides? Well, obviously this kind of process takes a significant amount of time. So there's a documentary in which the Zapatistas, which is an anarchist community in southern Mexico, are having talks with the government. And one of the government representatives commented on how long this was taking. The Zapatista responded by simply saying, "That's the speed of democracy." And I think that pretty much sums it up. So obviously...
Shut up. If they find out, it's all over for us.
Not today, bourgeois scum. So obviously there's a lot more to say on the issue, but for anyone that's interested in doing a bit more reading, I'll leave a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do think about subscribing and maybe sharing it to a couple of the mates, as the channel's pretty new. And if you've got a spare £1, please do consider checking out my Patreon. There's a bunch of cool rewards there for signing up. So I'll see you next time, guys, and remember, don't let the turkeys win.